I worked in the tailored attention and inclusion strategy in Spain, which is called Refuge of Power. It focuses on sub-Saharan forcibly displaced women's employability with the objective of improving their labor market possibilities and also giving them tools and capacities for self-employment, entrepreneurship. Okay, first we did a needs analysis. We analyzed their needs during 25 interviews to forcibly displaced people. Then we worked in a collaborative way in workshop with different NGOs and people also from the local administration and even from companies and of course from the academy to design together with the forcibly displaced people themselves adequate attention and inclusion strategies. So apart from this collaborative design, we also used action research, which means that we had 3 rounds of activities, training activities in our case, and after each training activity we had an evaluation. And if something went not so well, so we improved it. So there were adjustments after each evaluation round.
So our tailored attention and inclusion strategy has been identified in terms of methods and goals after having done a deep needs analysis with the context, the hosting community and different inclusion actors, and most importantly with the highly vulnerable people that are subject to forced displacement themselves. So what we noticed is that there is a high number of needs, not in employment, education or training. Those who enroll in a training pathway very often with a high percentage drop out early, thus they don't complete the cycle of studies. And there is a high number of female non-participation. So a low enrollment of women in inclusion strategies that are in place already in Sicily, Italy. So our research question was how to promote participation in education and how to ensure continuity. Therefore, how can we reduce dropouts? Our main goal was to work directly at micro level with the target group, with our co-experts, by improving the service provided by training and educational institutions like CESIE is, hoping to impact and influence at macro level also the policies. So we had the pleasure to work with women from the Western African countries and from the Northern African. So it was English-Arabic based training pathway that we called All You Can Learn. So our tailored attention and inclusion strategy called All You Can Learn springs, let's say, from the concept of offering a selective learning approach, a kind of training buffet and inclusion à la carte.
Our aim has been to increase the level of well-being or promote the well-being of young adult male asylum seekers in Finland. And what we have done is we have developed this kind of like online platform or discussion forum for these young men, together with the Finnish-speaking volunteers from the Finnish Red Cross. And the idea has been to somehow, of course, match these 2 different groups together, but mainly to enhance or to promote the information, or kind of like receiving the information for the asylum seekers, or getting the information about everyday life in Finland, about kind of like mundane information about everyday life. And there, like, for instance, information about schooling, about educational opportunities in Finland, and about labor markets, about work, and about different kinds of permissions that are required from the asylum seekers as well. And actually, I, as a researcher, have been also part of these discussion forums to provide some kind of like professional help for the volunteers and the asylum seekers if they are kind of like difficult questions about residence permits, for instance, or different kind of legal issues. And that's the basic or the core idea of the ties.
The ties was about developing childcare services in reception centers in Finland. So the main aim was to promote well-being of families seeking asylum and who have small children. First, we interviewed parents and professionals, and also did some participatory observation in childcare services in reception centers, and then we benchmarked the good practices and identified the targets of development. And we also had a trial of more intensive childcare. So for a period of 9 weeks, there was more hours of childcare provided, and also we provided transportation for families to ease the use of the services. And then based on this knowledge we got from these activities, we also established a model for childcare services to be used in all reception centers in Finland.
The objective of the ties that we did in Hungary is to enable social workers to work with vulnerable refugees, and we found it particularly important because the institutional structures for integration of refugees is quite weak in Hungary, and civil society organizations have to do the job instead of government institutions. And because of this, it's really important to enable social workers to understand the circumstances from which vulnerable refugees arrive, and all these institutional structures within refugees should find their way to integration to Hungarian society. Social workers who work with refugees started to describe cases from their own professional experience, and they anonymized the cases. And based on the cases, a handbook was compiled, which can be used in the training of future social workers. Also, there was a kind of a template, a self-reflection template that social workers used while they were working with refugees. And regularly, there were meetings where social workers could reflect on the ways how they work with vulnerable refugees, and then they could learn from this process of managing cases through the discussion of the cases among other social workers.
I think there is a very strong relationship between ties and the ARO functioning, because our ARO members, they represent different stakeholders like media, like artists or local government, academia, education, NGOs, civil society organizations, and private sector. And also the vulnerable group representatives themselves. So during our discussions, especially during the COVID period, and because it has a very significant impact and actually created higher vulnerability compared to already existing vulnerability. So we all realize that according to vulnerable populations, their own statements, their access to basic rights in daily life, like education, health, services, decision-making, and others, were not functioning properly. So they told us and they directed us that as a whole unit of ARO, it would be very necessary to provide trainings to local government service providers, the way they actually connect, interact, and provide services, particularly to women and young girls from Syria, from Iraq, and also the related populations. So it was the first time in Turkey that one municipality, one local government service providers were actually receiving trainings in terms of diversity, in terms of inclusion, in terms of monitoring. And we actually took monitoring as a kind of, not only to monitor accessing the rights, but also advocating the rights, how they are exercised. And at the same time, vulnerable population themselves, they were part of it. So they witnessed what was happening. They actually assessed.
Our ties focuses on providing psychological support for refugees or displaced persons in general, or asylum seekers, let's say, together with online training about the financial, legal and health awareness on a special online platform that help firstly displaced persons to participate in let's say an interactive exchange of knowledge. The main goal of this program, or let's say the TIE, is to enable displaced persons, asylum seekers in Jordan, to be self-reliant, independent, and with a little no need for external support. As well as providing or asking for psychological support services in Jordan is called, between refugee, let's say, or asylum seekers, is still stigma, okay, for them to visit the clinics. So I see if I can have an online psychological support, the services that could help them to get the treatment or support that they need, let's say, by themselves. To achieve this goal, actually, let's say that asylum seekers or refugees, displaced persons, must convert their negative experience into a motivation that support their future life. So in this TIE, we try to identify the psychological distress and the trauma, and effect care is essential in discover the strengthen that asylum seekers could rely on the face, let's say that, to face their daily challenges and benefits from existing opportunities.
Well, the aim of TIES was to deliver an online awareness campaign called Health for SEED, SEAD, that stands for Health, Social, Emotional, Academic Development. Age for SEED was geared to engage COVID-19 awareness, prevention, and treatment information. In Lebanon, the design TIES is geared at addressing these problems. Yet, it's very difficult to disentangle what we went through, COVID-19, from other crises in Lebanon and the problems and delays it represented in efforts to implement the TIES study. As Lebanon was already going through extraordinary difficult political, social, and economical crises that were exacerbated further by the catastrophic Beirut port explosion, which caused 218 deaths at the time of speaking, but it rose up to 222, injury over 6,500, and almost 300,000 homeless. This constituted an unforeseen risk factor that was to impact the direction of the study and the adjustments that were made to move the research process forward. Well, in the aftermath of the Beirut disaster, the government resigned and there were so many failures preventing so many processes forward. In LIU or LIU, we delivered a holistic coronavirus awareness to children, pregnant women, elderly people, malnourished people, and people who were all or immune compromised. The RAISE team in Lebanon, through its health committee, worked to enrich all stakeholders with the coping tools needed to raise their awareness and minimize challenges and trauma they continued to face amidst and beyond the COVID-19 pandemic and the dire economic and plethora of crises in Lebanon, which has had all so difficult hardships upon Syrian refugees and vulnerable people.